Everybody. Welcome to Project Heal Week at Meet and Eat Together. I have a guest with me today from Project Heal. Her name is Rebecca Eyre. She's a licensed mental health counselor and also the Treatment Access Program Director at Project Heal. So we're going to speak with her in a couple of minutes after I orient you to the hour, but I'm looking forward to hearing from Rebecca. What we're going to start with is first, just to let you know, we're going to be together for about an hour. If you have any friends or family members or anyone you think might benefit from participating today, please take a moment and invite and tag important people in your life so they can join us. Also, I just want to let you know that we have a chat box open. So if at any point you have a question or a comment, feel free to share. I'm going to try to keep my eye on it, and we'll try to answer any questions that come up during the hour. And what we're going to do today is have a meal together, and the experience is going to replicate what we do in a treatment setting. So I don't think I've introduced myself yet. My name is Melissa Gerson. I'm the clinical director of Columbus Park, which is a treatment center in New York City. And we work with eating disorders. And a big part of what we do, really central part of what we do, is meal support. And it was typically in person, but due to the crisis, we're now doing all of our meal support by video. So what we're doing today really replicates what we do in the clinical setting when we're running a meal support meal. So it's what we do is we first check in about the meal that everybody brought with them, and we provide basic guidelines. So we'll say, we'd really like to be sure that your meal is balanced, that it's enough to meet your needs. A balanced meal should have a carbohydrate, it should have a protein, it should have adequate fat. A fruit and vegetable is optional. It's a nice way to flesh out a meal, but it's not required. We generally suggest that if somebody brings a sandwich, that they have a side on the with it as well. Or if somebody wants to bring a salad, we want to make sure that the salad is adequate. So we require that it involves, in addition to the veggies, that it should have protein. There should be fat in there in addition to the salad dressing. So either avocado or egg yolk or something along those lines, maybe nuts, also protein and fat component. And then also a carbohydrate to be sure that there is adequate carbohydrate with the salad. So those are a couple of examples what we do, what we recommend for people. My meal today is kind of a classic. I'm going to share it with you today. I have a sandwich and a glass of orange juice and potato chips. And the way that I selected this meal was that mostly I'm working with what we have around the house. We kind of are getting low on bread, so I'm using a hamburger bun, but it's yummy because it's a brioche bun, so it's kind of sweet and tasty. And I filled my sandwich with some turkey and some cheese, Swiss cheese, which is not my favorite, but it's what we had around, so that's okay. Some honey mustard to give it a little extra flavor. And then I took a big handful of potato chips, threw them on my plate, kind of noshed on a few as I was getting ready. And then I just thought I would do a glass of orange juice today, in part because I think it goes well with this meal, and also because I know that caloric beverages tend to be something people struggle with. There's a lot of rules and shoulds around, is it okay to drink your calories? That's something kind of that comes up for a lot of people, that they view it as wasting calories. We view it as like being really flexible, and it's another way to get some energy, and juice can be really enjoyable. So it's really nice to be able to practice having sometimes having a beverage, a caloric beverage, sometimes not. So today I'm having one. And, in terms of my thinking around this meal, I tend to like sandwiches at lunch. I was kind of rushing, so it seemed like the course of least resistance to go with a sandwich. Really easy side for me, never fails to have potato chips because it gives a little salty crunch with the meal. Rebecca, hello. And can you share your meal and how you thought about putting the meal together?
Sure. So I am very, very lucky that I have a culinarily gifted sister quarantining with me here in Brooklyn. So the other night we made this like rigatoni pasta that has bacon and edamame and peas and Parmesan and lemon and like chili flakes. So I love savory, and I also think it's really important to have fats and proteins, and I like the green in this particular pasta, and it's salty. There's like flake salt on it. I love the crunch of a flake salt. I'm drinking a LaCroix. I'm not afraid of caloric beverages, but I do struggle with hydration. So having a source of water in my life that is a little more fun than just tap water really helps me stay hydrated. And then I have a bowl of mangoes. Let's see if you can see it here. And the real trick to enjoying mangoes, I mean, I love mangoes in general, but a little bit of hot sauce.
Oh, wow.
Do these items go together? Not really. One of them is sort of Italian. The other one is, I think, like a Puerto Rican specialty where I always see, and forgive me if I got that wrong, but I've always seen vendors in New York City, just like you're wandering through Manhattan, and you'll get these little Ziploc bags with mangoes and hot sauce, and I fell in love with them. So,
well, that sounds so good. You know, I'm aware of, sometimes in a Thai restaurant, you'll get it's like green beans with mango, and it's spicy, and with a peanut, like a peanutty thing. And so I can see how they would go together.
Yeah, mango is so good with spice. Yeah, there's like mango salsas, and there's,
that sounds lovely. I'm totally impressed.
Thank you.
So thanks for sharing that with us.
Thank you to my sister. Shout out to my sister.
So after we check in around our components, we set an intention for the meal. And I've talked about these before. The intentions are just a way that you're entering the meal mindfully, aware of something that you're going to be kind of working on or thinking about during the meal. It can be anything from a particular skill that you want to practice. It can be that you want to be mindful and aware of your eating, to eat at a certain pace, or actually like really experiencing the textures, the flavors of the meal. Many people also say that they want to not be mindful of the meal, actually, because there's so much anxiety. There can be so much anxiety around eating. So sometimes we talk about like distracting through conversation. So as much as possible, trying to be present in the conversation, so you're not thinking so much about the food, and you're kind of just doing it maybe a little more robotically for now, because you need the nourishment, and it's important to kind of get that nourishment, and you want to be as steady and calm as you can while you're doing so. So if that's something you're working on, just try as much as you can to keep attending to the conversation that we're having today while you're eating. So it's a good time to set an intention. Then what we do is we're going to set a timer. We're going to kind of try to eat within 30 minutes. It's kind of a reasonable amount of time that allows us to, be able to take a lunch break at work or at school, or, without some oftentimes in eating disorders, we find that meals can go on longer, maybe because it's difficult, or sometimes people who have very restrictive lives around food may extend the meal process because it's so enjoyable. Like it feels so good to actually be eating that you kind of don't want it to end. So there are a lot of reasons why timing of a meal can be hard. And so we're really working on shaping that behavior and trying to be able to complete the meal within 30 minutes. So I'm going to let you know when we're 15 minutes in. You can go ahead and start eating. I set the timer. I'll let you know when we're 15 minutes in. Then I'll let you know again when we have 5 minutes left of that half hour. And during the meal portion, I'm going to be talking to Rebecca. I'm kind of going to be conducting an interview. She's going to be sharing a lot of information about her experience, but also just some strategies to help us right now during this crisis in particular. And then at the end of the meal, after we're done eating, I'm going to continue some skills that we've started this week. During Project Heal Week, we're integrating some ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy strategies. And so we started with values, then we went on to mindfulness. And today we're going to talk a bit about diffusion. And I'll tell you more about that later. So we have a lot packed into the hour. I'm going to start eating now. Rebecca, don't worry if you can't eat while we're talking. If folks are kind of thinking about pacing, you can look to me. I'm going to try to keep a steady pace. And Rebecca, you'll do the best you can to eat and talk. But it's okay if you need to complete your meal a little bit later. So maybe just my first question is, what brought you to eating disorders? Like, what was interesting to you about eating disorders? Was it based on your personal experience or just an interest that you developed over time? Can you share?
Mm-hmm. Let me finish my bite.
Oh yes, finish your bite.
Yeah, that's my intention for the meal, is to try to balance talking and eating as much as I can. So, yeah, my journey into eating disorders was really interesting. I think that generally speaking, I have a lot of the predisposing factors that might lead to an eating disorder, but for whatever reason, whatever protective factors, I didn't actually develop an eating disorder myself. But I've really been surrounded by eating disorders my whole life. My mother has an eating disorder. My sister has struggled. My college roommate had an eating disorder. A former partner of mine had a severe eating disorder. So somehow I've ended up being kind of peripherally connected to people, or very closely connected to people who've eating disorders has been a primary struggle for them. And interestingly, leading up to grad school and through my internship, I was actually, because of the people in my life who had struggled with eating disorders and had sort of never sought treatment for it and weren't interested in recovering, made me sort of resistant to the idea of working with eating disorder folks, because I really hadn't met anyone who had been ready to and willing to recover. And so when it came time to select my internship, I was resistant to the eating disorder internship. And then I started talking with some of the staff there. And I realized that I sort of had a really deep intuitive understanding of eating disorders because of all of the exposure I had had. And what was really interesting, I ended up taking the eating disorder placement for my internship during graduate school. And what was so interesting was that all of a sudden I was surrounded by every person who was there for treatment had on some degree of willingness and motivation to recover. Because like, that's what it means to sort of go through the admissions process, to even make the call to go to treatment. Yeah. You have a baseline desire to heal. And so all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, I love working with people who have eating disorders when they're interested in recovery. And that was a revelation. And I just ended up finding the work really, really enjoyable. I worked at an eating recovery center in Washington for 5 years. And then I started a private practice. I ended up moving to Brooklyn. I'm licensed in Washington State. And so I ended up taking a break actually from practicing therapy. I needed a little bit of a breather, I think, after working in the treatment center world for 5 years, especially because I was in admissions for 3 of those years. And it's really, really kind of intense on the front lines. Sometimes that job feels like you're an interventionist. And I've recently reopened a teletherapy practice, which has become more and more, I think, relevant and needed as the coronavirus has happened. And so I'm still able to treat people in Washington, despite the fact that I live in New York City. And in the meantime, when I moved to New York, I actually started working at Project Heal. So I can tell you a little bit about what I do at Project Heal if you want to know that too. Yeah. So one thing that kind of emerged from my time at Eating Recovery Center and working with eating disorders, especially because I worked in admissions, was that I started to see really significant problems with access to care. So the number of people who would call me who were ready and eager and wanting to recover, but they didn't have insurance that the treatment center could accept, or, their deductible was too high and then they couldn't admit, or, basically financial and insurance barriers being the reason that someone would remain ill and not heal, just broke my heart. I also was a witness to a number of really unfair insurance denials, right? Insurance saying, no, this person doesn't meet criteria to admit to this level of care, or someone's at a specific level of care and then they get cut off by their insurance and have to discharge early. Those stories are just manifold. So there are millions of those stories. And I just started to see a really systematic problem in the treatment landscape, right? Treatment is expensive, and it becomes, by being expensive, a privilege. And then there's a lot of, I think, different definitions of kind of what level of care is required for different kind of clinical presentations. And there isn't a standard. So depending on which insurance you have, you'll have different kinds of access to care, which, as a person fundamentally bothers me, and it makes me angry. And then when you really drill down into the fact that there's actually a federal law called the Mental Health Parity Act that's that has existed since 2008 that's designed to prevent that, right? That says basically that mental health coverage should be covered just like medical conditions, but yet our insurance landscape actually doesn't cover eating disorders in the same way that you can get coverage for other things, which people experience all the time. So treatment access program at Project Heal is really designed to understand those barriers and to help people overcome them. So we offer treatment access grants to individuals who either don't have insurance or their insurance isn't covering the level of care that they need, through partnership with amazing treatment centers and providers who are willing to work with us either by donating their time and their care or their treatment to our beneficiaries, or by working with us on a sliding scale. And so we're able to help people who otherwise can't afford treatment access treatment, which can, be life-changing and sometimes even life-saving for people. I get dozens of applications every month from deserving people who are desperate and ready to recover, who have reached the end of their rope. They've knocked on every door, and they, for somebody to want to recover. And there's so many people who struggle with eating disorders who are like not sure they want to recover yet, and have a lot of ambivalence around it, and their willingness is questionable. But when you are like actually ready and willing to have a broken healthcare system be the thing that stands in the way of you having the life that you deserve, is just an injustice that I feel really committed to addressing. So that's what I do at Project Heal.
Wow, I just had goosebumps listening to
you.
You're doing such important work, and I love your frame of how your career has evolved, and how you've really landed in a place where you are really seeing people who want it. And just I want to clarify one thing though. You can really want a life for yourself and also still want your eating disorder. So I want to just clarify that wanting recovery doesn't necessarily mean that you feel like ready to give up your eating disorder. What it means is that you're ready to work on it, that you're willing and ready to take in new information and to challenge yourself in that way. And that there's a part of you that recognizes that it's not, the eating disorder is just not, there's more to life than that. So, I just want to clarify that, it's not always it's really not, it's rare that someone has tunnel vision. Like, I really want to be better. More typically it's that, I'm suffering and I really don't want this anymore. And I'm open to seeing a different side or the potential for a life.
I agree with that. It's definitely on a spectrum. And I would argue it changes sometimes hour by hour.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
And willingness and motivation to me feel really different. Willingness being, I think, an interesting part of ACT, which I'm sure you talk about. And then a motivation. Motivation is sort of a feeling, and you don't really have to feel that excited about recovery to be willing to do it.
I think that's so true. I think there's this big clinical paper, the Motivation Manifesto or something like that, Glenn Waller. It's a really interesting paper if you're, for therapists, for providers, clinicians, but he really talks about like motivation as being, we use that term a lot, and I believe in what the term stands for, but really it's not so much more about like what you think you want, but it's more about what you do. And I think like willingness is more specific, because it means that you're willing to do, you're willing to try something, you're willing to take a step. And so I love the way that you're differentiating that, just willingness to open yourself up to a possibility and try something, and willingness to kind of lean into the discomfort within reason. So, so I'm curious, from your perspective, both in private practice and as part of the Project Heal community, what are you noticing? What's coming up for people right now in particular during this crisis? Like, you're kind of on the front lines. So yeah. What are you noticing? What are some of the struggles that you're hearing about?
Oh, well, this is a great question. I think that there's very significant impacts to people's mental health with everything that's going on right now. I think people who are predisposed to depression or already struggle with depression might have worse depression than ever. Even people who haven't historically struggled with depression might feel depressed due to the isolation and the just everything that's going on.
The realities of like what's happening.
Global hopelessness. Yeah.
People we know, people we don't know, healthcare workers, bombarded with like sadness and empathy for so much struggling.
There's a heaviness in the world right now that's very real. And anxiety is high. I mean, if anxiety is defined very loosely as essentially sort of like a sense of impending doom or uncertainty about the future that feels overwhelming and sort of is stored in your body. Most people I know have anxiety right now, whether or not that's a regular part of their lives. So for people who are already predisposed to anxiety, it's at an all-time high. I think there's a lot of reasons, I think, to expect that people's mental health would be struggling. And I want to talk a little bit about how eating disorders can definitely seem and feel and be a lot worse given this context. I think it's also worth just naming that even before this, we had 28.5 million people uninsured. And that was at kind of like an 8% unemployment rate. And so now we're creeping up towards 20 and 25% unemployment rate. That's the prediction of the impact to the economy of this crisis, And those people in many cases have lost their insurance. And so for people who might have had access to treatment before, their access may be removed right now. And so what we're seeing is a significant increase in the need. We also have the benefit of teletherapy. People have the providers, the treatment centers like Columbus Park, and a lot of clinicians have transitioned their practices online, which has the really amazing side benefit of making treatment more accessible than ever. A lot of times people can't make the commute or don't have a car or maybe they live in a rural area. So there is no eating disorder specialist anywhere near them. And all of a sudden now they can get on a video call with a specialist. So, and groups like this, whereas somebody might not be able to get away from work, now they are able to access like a meal support group during the
there are these little silver linings. There are, in a way. Another interesting silver lining is that video therapy does create more access to people. I mean, without question. I mean, if you think, we're in New York City, so it's not so hard to get to a therapy office if you need to, but there are so many areas, so many around our country, internationally, where people have to travel so far to get care. So it really is kind of a game changer to be able to access video. And up until this crisis, insurance companies were really kind of tiptoeing around it. I mean, it was not, people were not getting the coverage. There were exclusions in plans around video therapy. There were denials for video therapy, actually, that were incorrect, that we'd have to appeal quite a lot. And so I think one like very small silver lining here is that the insurance companies they're covering it. And I think in some cases, even waiving some copays and things like that. So hopefully there's been a huge step in the community of mental health around access to care that might come out of this.
Absolutely. And state health departments are really loosening the regulations around it, which is
around out of state care. Yeah.
So in that case, there is definitely a benefit. But speaking of how eating disorders may be manifesting right now, I think that if you think about a couple of the key places that eating disorders play out, one of them is obviously in isolation. So depending on whether you're isolated or quarantined by yourself, your eating disorder may be louder than ever. Or if you're all of a sudden quarantined with your family, you may be additionally triggered. Those people may have been people who weren't helpful to you in your recovery. Now you're trapped in the house.
Without question.
It doesn't even matter.
This is the 15-minute mark. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah. And then obviously, even if you have a really positive relationship with people who you're quarantined with, being in the same space means that someone is aware of your eating disorder behaviors. You're doing way more in front of people. There's a lot less opportunity to hide. And so that can be really positive for recovery, and it can also be triggering or activating. And so that's definitely a thing. I think grocery shopping can be a pretty significant trigger for people who have eating disorders. And now I think most people feel really unsafe at a grocery store, right? Like it's sort of apocalyptic. You have shelves are empty and everyone's wearing a mask and gloves, and like maybe your favorite foods or your safe foods aren't available, or you have to sort of practice flexibility that you might not feel like you would have been ready for that step just in your own recovery journey, but you're being forced to do that now. So there's a lot of, I think, food scarcity, and also this kind of the hoarding of food, right? So I think a lot of people receive the message, and I'm certainly among them, like we all need to have a 4-week supply of food in our houses in order to prepare for the possibility of not having access to groceries, which means that people stocked up on kind of dry storage or shelf stable foods, and all of a sudden you have more food than you might normally have in your house. And I think that can be activating. Some people like to only have the food that they're prepared to eat that day or that week in the house. And so there's a really, I think, a difficult thing right now overall about food and control. And also when you think about that global anxiety that we all have about our health and about our economy, it makes a lot of sense that someone whose eating disorder is primarily about control might feel especially activated, because, you know, if your eating disorder has the origin of being a way to control the one thing you can control when everything feels out of control, then this would be a time that it would be really inflamed, because a lot feels out of control right now. And that's just the truth, much more so than normal.
And the lack of certainty, you know, when there's so much uncertainty, you know, you don't know when am I going back to work? When can I go out freely? When can I travel? You know,
when will this end? It feels like,
what's it going to look like in the fall? What's it going to look like next winter? You know, there's just so many questions, and that's so hard for everybody. And I think particularly with the eating disorder mindset, it really taps into that real desire and hunger for control and certainty and familiarity. And we just have none of that right now.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So it's kind of, in a lot of ways, a perfect storm.
Yeah. And I think relapse risk is higher than normal right now, because a lot of people have done amazing work to build lives for themselves, and routines for themselves, and structures in their lives, and relationships, and all these connections, all these things that, you know, any therapist or eating disorder specialist would recommend building up in your life to basically eliminate the need to have those behaviors, because you've filled your life with all of these amazing things. And then all of those things now have been taken away. And I think recovery can feel just like a kind of a full-time job, or one of the hardest things you'll ever do. And how do you maintain your hope about that when it feels like the world is ending? You know, or your stamina. I don't know if everyone else feels as tired as I do. I feel so tired all the time. And so many of the things that brought me joy, I don't do anymore. Like I can't go to karaoke. I'm an extrovert. Like I need people to have energy. And so that's all really real.
Yeah, I think we're not getting fed in a lot of ways through the ways that we are accustomed to. So for example, even just the little things about, living in a big city, when I go out my door, I'm fed by people smiling at me, or an interaction with somebody, or, just those little moments in the day. I think they accumulate and they give me a sense of connection or well-being. And so you get none of that. You have none of that input.
And also think about, I think there's science behind the idea. I know there is, I just don't know the numbers, but it's like, we need 12 hugs a day to have optimal mental health. I don't get 12 hugs a day. Maybe I didn't even before, but now my poor sister who I'm quarantined with is the only person I can hug. And that's like, every time I would see a friend, I would hug them. And that's just really important chemical hormones into your brain that we really need and we're missing right now.
Touch, like physical touch. Here we are, we're having so much communication on our screens, but no touch, No.
And imagine if we were in person, I would feel so much more like I met you, or like I could, if you and I meet in the future in person, it'll feel like the first time we met, even though we've had now this hour-long conversation. It's definitely different. And so
this is unnatural. It's not the natural structure of things to meet through technology.
Yeah. And I think humans are, this is the most obvious statement, but humans are designed for connection. And it's the lack of connection that I think sometimes supports the development of an eating disorder, interruptions to connection. And connection is often the absolute essential ingredient to recovery of any kind. And so how do we maintain connection through this? And I think, so that's kind of leads me into talking about some tips for how people may
please.
Kind of navigate this. I think getting creative with how you connect with people. Obviously, this isn't a way. So if someone's watching this video, they're obviously a resourceful person who's being creative about finding ways to feel connected. Like we mentioned, teletherapy is one way. A lot of support groups have moved online. I know Project Heal's support groups have moved online, which again, like we mentioned, opens them up outside of specific locations, which is cool.
Yeah.
And I think that there are ways to sort of, we were all talking about Zoom dates and FaceTime dates and, calling people, and it's hard to get the motivation to do that sometimes, depending on how you're feeling. But if you schedule those times for meal time like this, and it doesn't have to be nearly this structured, but just to say like, let's talk at 6 p.m. and let's both have food. Yeah. And then you have some accountability around meal structure, or just company during a meal. And that's the thing I'm thinking about the most, is the loss of the shared table, and how essentially human gathering at a table is, and how lost that is right now, especially with restaurants being closed. That was, I think, a main way. A lot of people have different relationships with restaurants, whether that's their favorite thing or the scariest thing. But one thing that's true pretty universally is that gathering around a table is one of those really essential magic human experiences that we don't get as much, depending on what our quarantine situation is. So finding ways to make space for that. Maybe you light a candle at your dinner table. Maybe you put your favorite album on and sort of recreate your favorite aspects of going to a restaurant. We have to, I think, do that thinking more in advance in ways that, restaurateurs make lots of money to try to facilitate that experience for us. Now we have to do it for ourselves, but there is a way to make it special. I think if grocery shopping is triggering, order your groceries online if that's available. Obviously, for most people, Amazon Fresh is an option, but there's a lot of other local options depending on how big of a city you live in. And I think focusing on foods that bring you joy, easier said than done, I think, in some cases, but something that's carrying me through quarantine is that my fridge is filled with things I'm excited to eat. And that's kind of how I punctuate my day. And that's how I get excited about the next day. That's how, and some days that's how I get out of bed in the morning. And then I'm like, so about the fact that I have my favorite thing, or that I'm going to try this new recipe. And there's some joy that can be had from making it about pleasure and less about, treating your body like a machine that just needs fuel. That's a perfectly fine coping tool when you need to do that, because
where you are in the process. Yeah, for sure.
But there's also so much pleasure in eating when you let there be pleasure. And, there's a reason we have taste buds, and that can be something to remember, that our bodies were designed to enjoy the food. If it was just fuel, we wouldn't have taste buds. It would just be
great point. We're made to enjoy food. I mean, we have pleasure centers in our brain that we're designed to be responsive to taste, to flavor.
So when the world feels this bleak, boy, do I need to pay a lot of attention to my taste buds to get through the day.
Absolutely.
I think that as much as we've lost a lot of our routines, I think creating new ones is a really good idea. Even if it just means setting a loose schedule, or doing at the beginning of a day, daily, like some kind of intention setting.
Planning ahead, trying to plan ahead, maybe especially around tough moments. If you know there's a particular time of the day or a particular meal where you struggle, planning ahead is always a really helpful tool. About 5 more minutes left of the eating portion.
It's important also to consider these structures loose. If you're someone who, once you set a schedule, then you're mad at yourself if you don't keep it, right? Like there are things that may come up, it can be adjusted. So knowing yourself and your relationship to structure, there are people who need to lean towards structure, and there are people who need to lean away from it or towards flexibility. And so knowing yourself and then trying to establish some kind of loose new normal during this time that allows for you to have things you're looking forward to, and have some accountability for your day. You know, if you have a meal plan, then one of the things that you need to do is figure out how you're going to meet that meal plan. So you can sort of loosely figure out how you're going to do that, or maybe not loosely, but figure it out to whatever degree is helpful. So that you don't get to the end of the day and say, oh, I didn't know about that in advance. Here I am now. And I think that leads me to my next thing, which is the most important thing I'll probably say this whole time, which is just to be really gentle with yourself. These are extreme times. Having an eating disorder is one of the most complicated, difficult experiences a person can have. And it makes sense if you're struggling more right now than you might normally have. It also is okay if you're struggling in new ways. And I think having grace for yourself rather than shame isn't going to help you at all. And perfectionism is never helpful. And so giving yourself permission to be where you are, or acknowledging that where you are makes sense given the constellation of factors that led to that place. I think it's a kind of a version of radical acceptance. Like, of course I'm here. Of course I'm having this response. Of course. And I also think there's a layer where it's important to remind people that just because everyone's saying it's okay to be struggling more, it's actually okay if you're not. There's a little bit of that eating disorder voice that kind of goes like, oh, well, I have permission to struggle right now. Is this the time for me to really like let it go because the whole world's telling me I have permission to? And I think it's like remaining accountable to what you're really capable of, and being honest with yourself. And there's no shame in actually doing okay right now. Maybe you thrive under pressure. Maybe the fact that the world feels like it's falling apart matches how you've always felt internally. So you feel calm for the first time in a long time. And, you know, I think there's a lot of reasonable ways to feel right now. And this doesn't need to be anything besides what it genuinely is for you, if that makes sense.
Bringing up something also that I wonder if people are feeling, and this is for people, you know, with eating disorders, without eating disorders, but, you know, I think some people almost find some relief in the current, some people find relief in the current structure where they don't feel like they have to go out of the house. They don't feel pressure to go out of the house. Like they don't have to get dressed. They don't have to feel like they're, you know, performing in their lives. It's almost like a little bit of a step back, and that, you know, it's okay to also appreciate that sometimes, that, you know, there are little moments of this whole crisis that you can look to as silver linings, you know. And the other thing I'm just sort of on that same note noticing, and I don't know, I know I have this kind of anxious thought about like, what will it be like to be back in the world again? Because in some ways I'm getting so accustomed to this that even when I imagine, you know, being back in my life, it makes me a little nervous, you know. Oh my God, I'll commute again to work, you know, I'll get dressed, I'll be in groups of people. So there's just almost an anxious thought around getting back and having mixed feelings about it in some ways.
And I think, people are like, I want to go back to normal. And some people are like using this as a chance to think about, did I like my normal before? And I wonder whether the world really won't return to the exact way that it was. I think that we're probably going to see a pretty significant shift in how we function. I think that goes for workplaces. I think we're learning new things right now. This is not just a pause. Like this is a moment for us all to evaluate what matters to us. What are the things that we miss and want to recreate and restore in our lives? And what are the things that maybe didn't work for us? And if you're loving not being under pressure to go to the gym, that's something I've heard a lot about, is like, oh no, what if they open the gyms again and now I'll have this refreshed pressure to go to the gym? And it's like, if you're enjoying not having that pressure, then you get to maintain that if you want to. And I think there's like
use your values now. It's an opportunity to really kind of rethink what's important to you and what life do you want. Like, you know, I have these thoughts like, I'm kind of happy to be out of the rat race. And so then I have the thought, well, maybe when I go back, I don't need to be so much in the rat race. You know, maybe I need to reevaluate, like, you know, like sort of the bigger picture of my life. So I think it can be an opportunity for that kind of reflection and growth and a reset in a lot of ways. So at any rate, you heard the alarm go off, which means the alarm. That sounds so stressful. I'm sorry, I didn't mean for it to sound so stressful. It's having an alarm. The buzzer went off. So we're about we're about 30 minutes in. So ideally, we're going to work to be completing our meal within 30 minutes. I found that I was able to complete within the time frame, maybe a little bit earlier. At the end of our meal, we usually check in. We want to make sure people have completed their meals. In a treatment setting, in meal support, usually people are at a place in their recovery where restrictive thoughts can come in and get in the way of hunger and fullness cues. So to kind of remove that possibility, we usually do require completion of the meal. So we'll usually make sure people were able to complete. And then we'll often do a quick check-in to see how people are feeling, just noting like their sensations in their body and also emotionally kind of where people are. And then we usually move very quickly into thinking about a skill or planning ahead for the day, so that we get better at like leaving the meal behind us and not having it kind of bleed into the day with worries and regret or shame or guilt about the eating. So what we're going to do today is kind of quickly move on to continue some of the skills training that we're doing this week in Meet and Eat. And what I'm doing this week during Project Heal Week is moving through some different ACT principles, acceptance and commitment therapy principles. So again, we started at the beginning with setting values, really trying to think about, just encouraging folks to think about who are you, who do you want to be, what's really important to you deep down inside. And it's so important to connect with that because that drives your behavior. If you're really working on, for example, I talked about wanting to be more present with my family. If I'm really working on being more present with my family, because that's important to me and it's really what I want for myself, that can be very motivating. And then it can guide certain behaviors and actions that I want to take in order to be more present. So we really, in eating disorder work, it's really helpful to think about, first, what's really important for you? What do you want for yourself? Then we talked about mindfulness and about, working on becoming more self-aware in the moment of what you're feeling and what you're thinking, in an effort to be more present focused, and less impulsive, less mindless, more intentional about what you're doing. So mindfulness can really facilitate that process. And now today I'm going to talk about thoughts and separating from thoughts. And this is something that I've done a couple of times over the course since we started Meet and Eat together. But I'm going to do a different, really kind of interesting exercise that we call ACT in a nutshell. And it's an experience that we'll go through that helps you understand ACT. And in particular, we're going to talk about diffusion. We're going to talk about how this exercise that we're doing together represents creating some distance from thoughts so that your thoughts don't kind of take over you and feel like commands or feel very, very real and fact-based and that just immediately drive behavior and action, but instead adding a little perspective on your thoughts, a little distance from your thoughts so they don't have so much control over you. So if you have a pad of paper near you, that would be great if you could grab it. If you don't, just pretend you have one. Use your hands, like make believe your hand is a piece of paper. And on that paper, you can imagine writing, or you can actually write one thought that you have that is not helpful. It's not an effective thought. It's maybe a thought that brings you down. A thought maybe that comes up for you a lot, like, I'm too needy, or, people have thoughts of like, I'm too emotional, or I'm too this, or I'm too that, maybe even a judgmental commentary on yourself. And write it down on the paper, or imagine you're writing it on your hand. And then the idea is that you want to take the paper or the pad of paper up to your face, and just hold it there, or hold your hand in front of your face. And, reflect on what it's like when that thought, that belief is just so close to you and it's blocking your worldview. And think about, are you able to engage in conversation? Are you able to really connect with what we're talking about right now? Are you able to go about your work? Are you able to hug somebody or hold someone's hand easily, or, see something beautiful? I think the answer is no. When your thought is just covering you and just taking up so much space, and we all have that experience when a belief or a thought takes so much space in our hearts and in our minds that you just feel overwhelmed with it. And so, that's this concept of fusion. That's what happens when we really fuse to a particular thought or a memory or even a sensation in our bodies that feels very overwhelming. When we are kind of overcome by that thought or feeling or sensation or memory, and we're fused to it, it really impacts our ability to take in the rest of the world and to function fully in our worlds. And so I want you to then, take the piece of paper or the pad of paper and then just put it in your lap. And what we're doing when we're putting the paper or the pad of paper or your hand in your lap is that we're modeling diffusion. And diffusion means that not that we're letting go of the belief or saying it's untrue or discounting it completely or trying to wipe it away or make it disappear. And we're not even trying to, something we do in cognitive behavioral therapy is like reframing it, finding a different way to see it. We're not even doing that. We're not trying to change our reaction to it, really. We're just creating some distance from it so that it doesn't have so much control over us. And, let's say the thought was, I'm too needy. You're not proving it wrong, and you don't have to dispute the thought, and it's there. And you can interact with it if you need to. You can evaluate, is it true? Is it not true? But it's not taking up so much space in your world. And so you're able to have a conversation, hold a hand, accept a hug. So you can see just physically how you're more open to the world. And so that's what we do through diffusion. And that's a skill that we practice. It's the idea that we can actually kind of take that control over our thoughts and allow the distance. And so some of the ways that we do that, and I've talked about a couple of these strategies before here, but one way I love the idea of taking negative thoughts that you might have or critical thoughts, or even a feeling like maybe it's pain, maybe you have a pain somewhere in your body, and kind of the idea that it's in a radio box, like the old fashioned radios, and that at any point you can turn the volume down a little bit and control the volume. So if you need to do something that's important to you, like come to a meal or engage with a friend or at an activity, or, that you're able to kind of turn the volume on and just imagine those thoughts or whatever it is kind of in that radio box. And it's just like a little chatter in the background. You know how sometimes you have the radio on or you have the TV in the background and it's kind of like background noise? Well, let it be the background noise and just keep imagining turning the volume down and turning back to whatever task you have at hand. And so that might be eating your meal. You might have thoughts that are getting in your way, like you shouldn't, or it's not right, or, the idea is like take it and put it in the box and just turn the volume down a little bit and then turn your mind to something else, listen to the conversation or engage in the conversation, or, distract yourself with something else. Another way you can do it is, people have probably heard of the leaves on the stream technique, where there's a particular thought and you kind of try to place it on a leaf and then watch the leaf kind of float down the stream. That can be another helpful image for people. In ACT, we talk sometimes about imagining all your thoughts and feelings and sensations as a show. It's like on a stage, and you're noticing, you're like looking at the stage and you're taking it in, but maybe you dim the lights a little bit or you turn your attention. And, your thoughts and feelings might be trying to grab you, like they're trying to get your attention. They're trying to be really dynamic and loud, which they do for us, really trying to get your attention. But again, they're on the stage, they're separate from you, and you have the ability to either dim the lights or close the curtain a little bit. And at any point you can attend again, but you get kind of flexible with that. So those are just a couple of ideas. I know, Rebecca, you've probably heard these all before because you're well-trained in ACT.
Yeah, I love them. Actually, one of the analogies or, images that I love is the idea that all of your thoughts are sort of on a shelf at a store. Kind of walk down the aisle and like you wouldn't buy everything at a store. So you get to decide which items to buy, and which to me is sort of a version of choosing which thoughts to believe, which is a way of deciding which thoughts get power. But it really makes the idea that thoughts are really just, they're kind of random synapses that your brain is giving you that aren't all the same level of valuable. And we get to decide what we put our money towards, so to speak, or our attention.
I really like that, because it kind of does get you connected with the idea, is this a valuable thought or not? Is this going to help me? Do I need that in my life? Mm-hmm. And if you don't need it, what's going to stop you from keeping it on? You want to keep it on the shelf. You don't want to take it, and if it's going to cost you a lot, what's the cost of that thought? Mm-hmm. If it's going to cost you a lot, maybe to think about whether it's worth it. So I love that one. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And the reality is like, even if you don't buy it, they're still on the shelves. So it's not about saying get rid of that thought.
Forever. It doesn't have to be forever.
We're not burning the grocery store down, the store down. We're just shopping.
Yeah. And it's like the time of day, maybe you're going to take that thought later, and that's like a really helpful thing. I can connect with that too. Okay, I'm really consumed with this thought right now. It's not helping me in this moment. At 5 o'clock, I'm going to address it. I promise. I'm going to think about it at 5 o'clock, but I'm not going to think about it now because it's getting in my way of something that's important to me, So
exactly.
Yeah, I love that. I love that metaphor. So thank you, Rebecca Eyre. Thank you very much for joining today. And I hope that you'll all come back again. Tomorrow is Thursday, the 23rd, and we have another Project Heal representative, Colleen Baker. And so we'll have a conversation, we'll have a meal together. And we hope to see you then. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.